Why, hello everybody. It is I, your pal, J.Ishiro, and we're going to be talking about something not a whole hell of a lot of fun today. We'll give it a few minutes for more people to roll in before we really start the show. If you could, please share this in your social media so that people know I'm on the air. As we all know, YouTube doesn't like me, and after this show, they may ban me, but, well, what the fuck. We only can do what we can do. So, as you guys comment, hello everyone. Is everyone aware of what happened today? Are we all aware? Okay, we're up to 8 listeners. Let's go a little longer. I'll keep urging everyone to share on their social media that I am live. And we will get started. Let's wait till we get about 12 people in here before we start. 10-minute notification delay. Thanks, YouTube. Yeah, tell me about it. Okay. Whoa, 16 people. Okay, let's get started. All right. Today in Atlanta, there was a shooting spree. 8 people, mostly women, all, I believe, Vietnamese, died when a young man apparently went on a shooting spree in a nail salon. Now, for those of you paying attention, hate crimes against Asian Americans has been skyrocketing over the last year and a half. And the press has been very, very interested in framing this as a white supremacy issue. They never talk about race when it comes to the perpetrator, except this one. They always try to skew it as a hate crime against an Asian, but then we never really know anything about the perpetrator, other than, he was bad. And then, Trump's name got thrown around a lot, and they tried to blame it on the Chinese virus as what sparked this. Today, the crime was committed by a white man, and the police chief himself in the investigation has confirmed, despite what the news says, no, this was not a hate crime. This guy was a sex offender, and apparently he had a bizarre obsession with Asian women and had been known to frequent these shops and be a real creeper. This person was mentally ill, and as they put it, looking at his behaviors and search pattern or his web search patterns, they say he had what was a deviant sex addiction with violent tendencies. That's not a hate crime. It's still awful, but it's not a hate crime. And now that they've got a white perpetrator, we're seeing his face everywhere. And the press is more than thrilled to talk about, hey, look, white guy hates Asian women. Because that's the division they want. I find this to be disgusting on all levels. The fact of the matter is, white crime against Asians is negligible. In the greater scheme of things, it's not incredibly high. If you were to go by percentage-wise, according to the DOJ, 24% of crime committed against Asians, it's by a white male. That's almost a fourth of all crime, violent crime against Asians. 28% is by a black male. Now, think about that. The US population is 62% white. And so, assuming all things were equal, you'd assume 62% of all crime committed would be by a white person. But all things are not equal. Black Americans make up 12% of the population, yet they're responsible for more than a fourth of all violence against Asian Americans. That means a very small minority of people commit more attacks than the entire white majority. Okay? That's a fact that no one wants to talk about. Another thing that you should take into account is that, so a fourth of crimes committed against Asians are by white people. Take in mind, Asians usually live around white people. If there's going to be a conflict, that's where it's going to be. There isn't a huge glut of Asians living in black neighborhoods. So the fact that 28% of the crime against Asians is a black male is even more strange. Now, I've known about this for a long time, and the press has never wanted to talk about this, ever. And they really, really want this to be some sort of Ku Klux Klan cross-burning thing. But it isn't. It absolutely is not. Is there a bit of an issue of stalkery white guys getting obsessed with Asian women? Oh yeah, that's absolutely true. That's undeniable. But that still doesn't account for a bulk of the crime. That's not a massive number. It's bad enough to be a stereotype, a true one, but it's not an incredibly huge number, and it usually does not result in murder. Now, one of the things that a lot of people, like I said, the press doesn't want to talk about is for ages we've known that black crime against Asians, especially Asian business owners, is a serious problem. During the LA riots, Korean businesses were purposely targeted to be burnt down. There was a reason for that. I mean, that was a selected target. Also, just a random fact to throw out there, Chinese takeout restaurants that are in black communities on average need to replace their drivers every 3 months because that's on average the amount of time it takes for that driver to get mugged, robbed, or beaten during a delivery. They always quit afterwards. And this is not a new fact. This is not a new development. In New York, the vast majority of crimes are against Asians committed by blacks. I mean, the number is just ridiculous. Now I get to talk about the world I saw in San Francisco, the Sunset District. This had been a problem back in the 90s, since the 90s, and never stopped. The Sunset District is kind of considered the working class area of San Francisco, or had been. It probably isn't anymore. And it was primarily a white and Asian community. And I actually spent a lot of time there when I was in school. It was a regular place for me. I'd hang out. And yeah, most of the businesses were either Vietnamese, Thai, or Irish, because there was a lot of Irish families living there that had been there for generations. I mean, it was weird. There were Irish families that had been there so long that they still had a brogue they were passing down to their kids, and their kids would develop it. Likewise, after the Vietnam War, one thing we don't talk about much is actually Nixon was very, very good to the Vietnamese. For all the horrible things you could say about Nixon, he was very good to our Vietnamese allies and really went above and beyond and out of his way to make sure that people who were no longer safe in Vietnam, refugees, could come to America, set them up with jobs and homes and education. And that is why there is such a strong Vietnamese community throughout California, because that's where most of them were placed. Sunset was one of those areas where a lot of Vietnamese were. Actually, strangely enough, where I lived in Mesa was another one when I was in San Diego. Now, there was a place I went to just to give you an example of the environment of what the Sunset District was like. A lot of Catholic churches. And that seemed to be something that they bonded on as well. The Vietnamese were largely Catholic as well. And there was a coffee house I used to go to that I would frequent. I believe it was Vietnamese owned, and their employees were a mix of Vietnamese and Irish Americans. There was a great place there that I used to get my car fixed. It was called Shamrock Honda. I know. Talk about stereotypes. The family had ran it for like the last 3 generations, Shamrock Honda. And these guys were about as Irish as you get. And yeah, they talked in brogues and they had the red noses. It was a bit of a stereotype, but they were nice people. And what was interesting about this place is whenever I took my car there, they were half their employees were usually Vietnamese young men from the families in the neighborhood. And what I found odd was this Irish family was hiring Vietnamese men, a lot of them who could not speak English very well. But yet somehow these guys managed to communicate, fix cars, and do a damn good job. And also they'd cut you a deal if you paid them in cash, which is good for a college student. So there wasn't any tension. I lived there. I saw it on a daily basis. There was not any tension at the time between the white Irish community and the Vietnamese there. It was actually kind of the American melting pot realized right before our eyes. I thought it was wonderful. Now, there was a horrible fact about the sunset that San Francisco bent over backwards to cover up. They refused to talk about, they didn't want it reported, and that was that San Francisco, the Sunset District, 85% of all physical assaults in the Sunset District were by Black Americans. And that's an interesting fact considering that neighborhood had almost no Black Americans living in it. In fact, San Francisco itself had a very, very small Black community. Most of them lived in Oakland. And if you saw Black youths in San Francisco back in the 90s, it's because they rode the subway or bus over from Oakland. And yet, 85% of all physical assaults on Asians were from African American men. And there was this very, very visible resentment or even hostility between Blacks and not just Asians, but everybody else. There was kind of this notion that a lot of these hardcore lefty types, Black leftists, would say stuff like, "Oh, we African Americans did all the work during the civil rights movement, and these Vietnamese people, they get all the benefits. Look at how much money they're making." It's like, which is a really skewed narrative if you think about it. And now here we are in 2021. The Biden administration really, really needs us to believe that this country has a white supremacy problem. And we do. It's called Biden. Guy's a fucking racist. Had Klan ties. You go through his history, he was really fucking racist. But let me tell you, the white issue is not on the ground level. It's not on average working Americans. If anything, it's the leftist elite that are racist, and they are doing everything in their power in the press and in the established media, the establishment itself, to drive that wedge because, well, fact of the matter is, they don't see Asians as fitting into their narrative of oppression. They need a reality in which whites are stepping on colored people. And the fact is, Asian women make as much money as white men on average. Did you know that? So that even fucks up the feminist myth, okay? The whole thing about, hey, women don't get paid as much as men. Well, that's not entirely true. When Asian women enter the workplace, apparently they work just as hard and do the same hours and come in with the same skill level as most white guys and make just as much money. And on average, Asian men make a little bit more. That doesn't fit the narrative, now does it? I'm sure that once they're done fucking with the Asians, they're going to move on to probably the East Indians, who are even more successful, believe it or not. And I'm really wondering what they're going to do for the tiny, tiny, tiny minority of Nigerians in this country who make even more money. Now, granted, that's a small elite group of people, usually coming from upper class bloodlines, but not necessarily. But yeah, the Nigerians are highly successful. And I'm just wondering, one by one, are they going to go after these different groups because they don't fall into the narrative and somehow try and blame it on white Americans? It's ridiculous. I mean, most mixed marriages between Asians are white and Asians. You're telling me there's some sort of white supremacy here? That's fucking bullshit. Okay. And so on the news today, as we see the political left fall over themselves to somehow weave a narrative that this one weird sex offender freak is proof that white supremacists are out to get Asians. Realize the vast majority of the crimes going on right now, and there are a lot of them. Apparently the black on Asian crime in San Francisco right now is going through the roof, and they primarily attack the elderly. believe it or not. When that gets reported, they don't talk about race, do they? Right now, we're going to hear nothing but what this guy's race is, and they're going to try and spin it as some sort of Klan sort of thing. No. And furthermore, let's take a step further. I don't think any of this should be judged by race. This guy was an individual. He made his choices. He suffers the consequences. And I think when it comes to every fucking black offender that commits a crime against a nation, sure, go ahead. Show his face. Don't try and cover his race. But treat him as an individual. He made his choice. He'll get what he deserves. Not the black community, not Black America, not some large abstract race issue, but individuals doing bad things to other people. That's the way this should be approached. And the fact that they're trying to spin this as whites against Asians, frankly, makes me want to vomit. And when I grew up, even most Asian kids who were Hafu, well, we were half white, often half Irish, strangely enough, and that had to do with the war, I believe. There were a lot of war brides. So, yeah, it's not an issue. But let's see. I'm going to go through your comments now, and I'm going to answer your questions or get your. I want to know what you want to hear from me, what you think, and if you have any questions. Oh, it's being reported as a nail salon in the mainstream press. Was it really a massage parlor? Well, doesn't that just piece it all together, doesn't it? A sex offender. That makes perfect sense. And that's very interesting that it was a massage parlor, because when I was living in Berkeley, I didn't know this till much later. My apartment that I had was right above what was a furniture store. It was an independent furniture store owned by a Vietnamese family. Very nice people. But then there was a second door that should have been to their storeroom, and it was just off to the corner, just a single door in a wall. And eventually I found out it was called Tiki Massage, and they also ran a massage parlor, quote unquote. So yeah, that's pretty normal. And yeah, we occasionally did get weirdos who would come by that door because, well, it's a massage parlor. But yeah, that actually puts it all together, doesn't it? This guy was a sex offender. He had a weird obsession with Asian women, and he shot the place up. Coulter's law in effect. He's white, so we'll all know about the details, about every detail in his life. Yeah, and they'll probably make some up too. Basically, Asians are too privileged by their own work. So basically, cishet whites now. Yeah, exactly. Oh, great. He's going to get lumped in with the BDSM community, calling it, it's possible. It sounds like the shooter loved Asian ladies, and not in the nice way. Yeah. Well, you see the picture of the guy. He has the mental illness haircut and the fucking crazy eyes. In fact, he kind of looks like your average run-of-the-mill soy boy SJW, which, if that's the case, I wouldn't be shocked. But yeah, he has the SJW haircut, and he has the SJW crazy eyes. Now, I'm not making any judgment on his political stance, but it's worth noting. Rooftop Koreans isn't just to me. No, I remember the LA riots. I remember watching the live broadcasts. I used to have a videotape until it went up in flames during the San Diego fires that had a lot of footage that people didn't want to admit existed. But during those live broadcasts, because I recorded them when I was a teenager, there were quite a few shootouts caught on camera. And yeah, those rooftop Koreans were a real deal. They weren't going to let their stores get torched, because once the word got out that blacks were targeting Korean businesses, they weren't going to have their livelihoods go up in flames. And the press didn't know how to handle it. Were you going to vilify the Koreans, or are you going to vilify the blacks? No, we just will pretend it didn't happen. Minnesota has a large Vietnamese community as well. Interesting. So is that where the Minnesota voice comes in Fargo, where the one, what is it, the one Chinese guy, or was he Korean, who had the Minnesota accent was written in, which was hilarious. We have a lot of Hmong in Wisconsin. Nicest, hardworking people. Glad to have them here. Exactly. The thing is, we're going to have to get to a point where we admit certain cultures blend better than others. It's not a shock. It's not a big deal. It's inevitable that different cultures work together differently. For whatever reason, white America and, vast majority of Asians that come to the country, they're not similar cultures at all, but they're complementary. For whatever reason, those two cultures get along fine. But on that same note, there is a fuckload of animosity and with Black Americans, and Black Americans do not get along with Asians. I know that there had been lots of talk during the 90s that Korean business owners and their mannerisms didn't really jibe well with the Black locals. And, is anyone to blame? Maybe not. Maybe that is just a symptom of different people behave differently and different things set each other off. Maybe the smartest choice is that Asians just not build businesses in Black neighborhoods. I mean, it would be a shame because it means even less business in Black neighborhoods, but maybe it's better than having your drivers get beat up. When I was living in Mesa, it was a very interesting environment. It was largely white, Filipino, and Vietnamese. A lot of ex-military families, and it was in general a pretty peaceful place. The biggest cause of crime in Mesa was primarily illegal aliens who would show up and just kind of essentially they saw cars and public property is theirs for the taking. I had my car stolen twice, by the way, and in both cases, when I got the car back, the radio was tuned to a Spanish-speaking station and filled with, this is going to be the worst stereotype, filled with adult Taco Bell bags. Yeah, the car had been completely trashed on the inside. But it was weird. They wouldn't steal the car and sell it. They'd steal the car, drive it around till it was out of gas, and abandon it. And this happened twice. And that was very common in this neighborhood. Is illegals would just show up, see a car, take it. And then when the illegals started building tents in the park, and we got the heroin addicts and the knifings and the gang fights. But that's more of a drug thing. Shamrock Han. So Shiro's Han. His Irish son. Are you sure we're not Ishiro Honda, the director of all the Godzilla films and the great film Matango? The media has done such a great job of driving a wedge between whites and blacks. Now the news can gin up riots on command. Whites and Asians get along so well, so now they're trying to divide them. The thing is older Asians don't buy it. A lot of the younger woke Asians are trying to buy into it. But I don't think that's going to last, and I'll tell you why. Because that alliance did not last with the woke white women and the Black Panthers. The same thing happened in the 60s, and especially in the 1970s, is that the media and the leftist establishment tried to forge an alliance between the women's lib movement and the Panthers. And it's a very ugly bit of history that a lot of people won't talk about it. But if you talk to old hippies, old activists, old feminists, which I have, when no one's around, they'll sit down and say, look, okay, here's the truth. And what it really resulted in was a lot of black guys raping a lot of white women. And, it doesn't matter what the press says. Once that happens, the word's going to get around. You stay away from the Black Panthers. And that was the case for a lot of it. The Black Panthers, I actually had a therapist for a while who was very active in the 60s. He was one of those Quaker types. And he had fond memories of his activist days, but said that the legend of the Black Panthers was a load of crap. And he said that they were the most violent, horrible people he'd ever met, that they were essentially there to rape women and get drugs and take advantage of gullible idealists. I don't doubt it. I don't doubt it at all. You hear the interviews with the founders of the Black Panthers, and they pretty much said they were con artists. They were selling. They made their money initially from selling Mao's little red book on campus at Berkeley. They'd never read the damn thing. They just knew these dumb white kids would buy it, and so they were They had their own cheap copies they were printing. So why does YouTube allow crazy white bitch on search results and it isn't racist? Hmong in Minnesota in the 80s. Is it Hmong? I'm not sorry. I'm not worldly enough to know about Minnesota. Never got the opportunity to visit. The land of Jesse Ventura and the icicle vampire. That's what his name was, right? The icicle vampire? Rod, I forget. He ran for office. When I lived there, no tension, some curiosity from many generations of people of European descent, very old world, polite from all I encountered. Rochester, well, Midwesterners in general, especially Minnesotans, I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to flat out, there's an interesting thing about Minnesotans that I've met. I like Minnesotans. They've all got kind of this weirdness streak. You first meet them, and they're very down to earth, very humble people with their, well, then you get them talking, and there's a weird streak going on there. I mean, weird humor, weird in-jokes, weird ideas, puppet shows, landmarks, humor, things like, again, the icicle vampire. It's kind of an interesting dichotomy. It was interesting to find out that Jim and Tammy Faye Baker started in Minnesota, and well, Jim, the guy, was it Jimmy? Was it Jimmy or Billy? Billy Faye or Demi Faye? The husband was pretty much a con artist, but the wife, Tammy Faye, actually wasn't. She was not really aware of just how screwed up it was. And you see her old broadcasts, and she would put on these bizarre puppet shows that were fucking weird. They were funny, but they were fucking weird. And he would do his TV preaching, and she's on the side doing these strange-ass puppet shows. But yeah, Minnesotans are interesting. We have a problem with racism. Bitch, go look in the mirror. Yeah, there you go. The Democrats, it's interesting is that for most of history, the Democrats were the racist party. They were known as the party of slavery. Then in the 60s, Lyndon Johnson managed to convince everyone they were the party of civil rights and just started handing out welfare. And it's interesting now, here we are in 2021, and the mask has come off. Biden, again, is now very open. It's not just Biden. Democrats in general are very much talking about, segregation. They have different names for it. Segregated dorms, segregated classes, segregated, cafes, universities. There's a lot of stuff on that, on the books now they're trying to pass, that it's essentially segregation. Now, why would that be? Because they're the party of racism. I have absolutely never witnessed any Asian crime, and I've been witnessed any Asian hate crime, and I've been in every U.S. state in America except Alaska and Montana. I'm trying to think if I have. I don't think I actually experienced any of the. Well, okay, there was that experience in Oakland, but it initially was a Black on Mexican crime that then expanded to almost a Black on Asian crime. And that was because there was this older gentleman that was standing in a parking spot, and he was visiting from Mexico. He was visiting his son. And this Black guy rolled up and was screaming at him to move. And the guy was actually from Mexico. He only spoke Spanish. So he was pulling the no hablas, Inglés, no habla, right? And so the black guy ran him over, just full on, just plowed over him. And I mean, his girlfriend fucking laughed when he did it. And then the guy's son pulls up and sees that his dad's just been hit by a car, runs out, says, "What the hell did you do, my father?" And this black guy, full head taller and ripped, stands up and just starts. It was pretty clear this middle-aged Mexican dude was about to get the ever-living shit kicked out of him. And as they started arguing, and he's a Mexican dude, so he wouldn't back down. That's something about Mexican dudes. It doesn't matter if they're shorter or they're weaker. They're not going to back down. I think that's a trait of just Mexican Americans in general. They refuse to be bullied, even if they're going to lose. But so this guy, middle-aged dude, full head shorter, was not backing down from this younger black guy that was ripped. And what was weird, as black people were walking by on the sidewalk, they would just flock to the scene and immediately back up the black guy. And it was like, "Get out of our neighborhood, you dumb Mexican. Yeah, you gay, you fucking beaner. You don't belong here." It's like, holy shit. And I'm seeing a crowd form. And so I went inside to a nearby floral shop, a florist. And I told the woman behind the counter, who was Korean, and said, "Look, you better call the police. You're gonna have a riot out front if you don't do that." She didn't call the police. Instead, every Asian business down the street, all the men came out holding cleavers and rolling pins, and some of them had their hands in their aprons, probably holding firearms. And at first, the black crowd was ready to rumble, but then they saw that the Asians were armed and changed their mind. So very interesting. Very, very interesting. Other than that, the only real racism I saw in San Francisco from black on Asian was a lot of just really perverse language. Well, to put it bluntly, very lewd language to women. The idea that the women were meek and easy was kind of the stereotype. I saw a little bit from white frat boys who were drunk, and they could be pretty disgusting, but I never saw any physical things go down. Not in that regard, at least. I have never met a person who said they hate Chinese food. Hating Chinese food is un-American. I would agree. My Cameroonian neighbors were way more educated than I am. She was a nurse and he was a lab technician. Was happy to know they moved out because they were buying a house. Oh, wow. Okay. My father used to live near Cambodian town. Back then, blacks would regularly victimize Cambodians because they got the impression that they were rich because they would save their money up to buy expensive things. Yeah, and there was a lot of home invasions in both Orange County and in San Francisco for the same notion. So we'll go raid the house because the old fart living there, this old Asian guy wasn't going to be able to stand up to him, which usually was true, unfortunately. Since when does a sex offender know where 3 nail salons are? Who approved the permit to allow a business name, young Asian girl? Even the BBC is calling it a massage parlor. I find it interesting that the Atlanta press and a lot of the US press is trying to pass it off as a nail salon. It was a rub and tug. The headline read, was that guy did was to eliminate his sexual temptations. Does that sound like someone who's mentally stable? To relieve my sexual temptations, I will gun down 8 people. No, that is someone who needs to be locked up, put in a straitjacket, or possibly just put down for the rest of us for our own good. And I'm being blunt. If that really is where their mind is, and medication can't cure it, maybe the best choice is just to put the person down. Rioters stood down, psychologically broken wind-up toys back in play. Must be a Dem administration. Well, actually, the rioters aren't standing down in a lot of places. They're just not being reported on. Apparently, Portland's just as bad as ever. I thought Biden already pushing gun control. Yeah, he is. And you know what? If he manages to get it across, I just suppose we've all lost our guns in a boating accident. Okay. The guy's pictures, he had the worst beard ever. Yeah, he had a hipster beard. The beard should tell you what he was insane. Remember how the MSN reported that Pulse nightclub shooter is gay? Yeah, they really didn't want to follow up that it turned out he had to be a nothing burger. Yeah, you know what? The guy was essentially, he was just a fanatical Muslim. And, you know, there was also a shooting in San Bernardino, which was not far from where I had lived when I was growing up, where it was a Muslim who shot up a Christmas party. And yeah, the press did not want to talk about race. They were all ready to talk about how it was an anti-Semitic attack because it was only Jews who got shot, but they would not mention the race of the shooter or his religion. And they tried to imply white supremacism again. They can't deal with reality. They need it to be white supremacism. They're not comfortable with the idea of anybody else doing bad things in the world because it destroys their narrative of an oppressed class. It shows individual choice. It shows individual responsibility, that anybody can do something awful. And often it has to do with how they're raised, their culture, and their values. Okay. More, I was thinking, the whole never let a crisis or tragedy go to waste. Well, isn't that the definition of the DNC? Asians are targeted by SJWs at colleges because they're a successful group. Yeah, that's very true. They are targeted by SJWs quite a bit, and it's because they're visible. To a lesser degree, more and more Jews are finding themselves targeted now too, as well, SJW, the whole leftist notion. It's strange because initially, when an SJW movement starts, when the leftists start, like communism, initially there's always a lot of Jewish involvement. For whatever reason, the Jewish community has always been very, very active and involved in leftist thinking. Marx was a Jew. A lot of the Frankfurt School were German Jews. It's very common. A lot of this thinking, Abby Hoffman, Jewish, a lot of the big thinkers in the 60s, was it, the beatnik, who turned out to be a pedo, I forget his name. But what happens is, as initially it starts that way, at some point, this idea, and it's Marxist it's Marxist theory in action. Initially, you have a lot of Jewish involvement, a lot of intelligentsia, a lot of money. And at some point, that leftist movement, when they start doing the every relationship is an oppressed oppressor dynamic, they immediately look at who has the most money and who's in charge of the movement usually. And they decide, hey, wait a minute. The people with the most money here are Jewish. They're our oppressors. And the next thing you know, your communist revolution is executing all the Jews, as what happened in Russia. And it's a pattern. I've seen it time and time again in organizations where initially, when I was in San Francisco, I worked at a place called Peace Action. Initially, a lot of the people there running the place were very intelligent, successful Jewish kids. And as the oppressor-oppressed narrative wore on, immediately after, they started saying, well, wait, who's the richest and most successful in the room? Oh, it's you. Well, you're our oppressor. And suddenly they're sympathizing with Muslims and talking about how, maybe Israel should be wiped out. I'm not shitting you. That was and it was a bizarre thought process because I would see it happen over and over again. You can fucking map it. I would like to actually see a step-by-step logic of how that happens, because it can be mapped and it's really eerie. So, I think right now it's very easy because Asians are successful. And you look at them, then you know they're an Asian. They're very visibly Asian. Those features are very distinct. Where, the Ashkenazi Jews could be anybody. I mean, fuck, for most of my life, I had no idea who was or wasn't Jewish. I mean, it just wasn't an issue in Southern California. You didn't think about it. The only time you ever knew if someone was Jewish is if they brought it up themselves or wore Star of David. But other than that, you didn't know. And even those two things were rare. When I was in high school, there was only one kid that I knew was Jewish. And the only reason I knew he was Jewish is because in debate club, him and the Palestinian kid, all they would do is argue about Israel. That's what they wanted to debate. That's all they ever debated. And of course, they seemed to really enjoy it. It was like they'd scream at each other and smile the whole time, screaming about how the other was a genocidal maniac. I guess that's a story for another time, but that is the only kid I knew that was Jewish. I knew that he wasn't the only one, but it just was not something you thought about or cared about. It wasn't an issue. And so I think that was the case in a lot of these colleges. Is at first nobody really noticed because, what are Jewish features really? I mean, there's the New York stereotype, but that's really limited. I mean, at this point, they look like anybody else, really. So I think the weird thing that the left is now suddenly becoming very fascinated with the Jewish community. I think they're next. Them and the East Indians. I think they're going to be next on the chopping block. And it's a worrisome thing. It really is. And I find it weird that a lot of these traditional organizations like the ADL and the Southern Poverty Law Center will not acknowledge it. They're still making excuses for these leftist groups, Antifa, BLM, all the various blatantly anti-Semitic behavior being carried out by these organizations, still covering for that behavior, trying to weave a white supremacist narrative. I don't know if this has to do with something about Germany and the Holocaust or whatever, but at some point, they're going to need to open their eyes and look at reality and realize, the white Christian population of the United States is not the Nazis. In fact, the people who freed the Jews from those camps were primarily white Christian boys who gave their lives. This isn't Germany. This isn't the great fascist dictatorship that Sarah Silverman wants everyone to think. The old glory, stars and stripes. When you fly that in front of your house, that flag in your house, that doesn't mean you're a fascist. Actually, it really made me ill when Silverman claimed that, compared flying the flag, stars and stripes, to a swastika. Frankly, I thought that was one of the most ungrateful and disgusting things someone could say about this country that, frankly, she's been highly successful in. But Hollywood, right? What are you going to do? So, yeah, I think we've hit the point in leftism where they're just starting to pick minority groups to attack who are successful. I mean, the ultimate goal is we've all got to be as miserable as them, right? We've all got to be equally poor and equally miserable. You can't possibly stand out or be an individual or rise on your own through your own effort. That's forbidden. It's collectivism. You can't be an individual. Shamrock Honda sounds like a pro wrestler. Oh, yes, that's right. Shamrock Honda, the Japanese, the Japanese patty that hails from Dublin. He'll drink you under the table with a sake and a gun. Oh God, I'm screwing this up. And with a sake and a Guinness, and then he'll put you in a titty twister. Actually, yeah, he should be a sumo wrestler from Dublin. How about that? Shamrock Honda. And he should wear a little leprechaun hat, but look like E. Honda from Street Fighter. Was making a joke about the founder of Honda Motor Company. Fucking Taco Bell bags, Jesus, what a bunch of assholes. No class, fucking no fame. Okay, the thing was, not only did they always trash the car with Taco Bell bags and cheap beer, every time they turned on the radio, like I said, it was always a Spanish-speaking radio station. And by the way, because it was San Diego, those stations were all being broadcast from Tijuana over the border. But the one that was the real kicker wasn't the Mexican ranchero station. That was just like, oh, fucking figures, of course, ranchero music. Taco Bell bags and ranchero music. No, it was the second time my car got stolen. I get in, it's trashed all hell, full of, beer and Taco Bell bags, and it's tuned to the Mexican evangelist channel preaching about Jesus. That is a special kind of fucked. There's a few woke Asians. They're going to get kicked out soon. They're going to get kicked out soon, or they're going to get worse. And I guess they need to learn on their own. 90s rappers used to rap against Korean stores in the black community. Yeah, they did. There was a lot of racism. And wasn't NWA pretty vocal about it too? Capitalists selling the Little Red Book. Of course, exactly. The black community has enough gynocentric submission already. Yeah. When this shit happens, the black on Asian violence happens, or any sort of that, it really bothers me because there's something strange I don't understand quite about the black community. Asian Americans, white Americans, Indian Americans, they're all individuals. Mexican Americans, they're all individuals. Yes, they have their heritage. Yes, they have their background. They know where they're from. They have their traditions. They have their holidays, their special things that came with them as they came to this country. Just like that Irish family spoke with a brogue and celebrated all sorts of Irish holidays that I only barely know about. Very few of those translated to the Irish side of my family, just enough. But they were still each an individual person. If an Asian person did something, if an Irish guy did something, you didn't really judge all of them. I know at one time that used to be true of the Irish. You judged all of them. But in this day and age, when somebody did something bad, it was that person only. It didn't speak about an entire race. And what I don't understand is it's only two groups of people that I can think of, maybe three. I take that back. I can only think of three groups of people where the action of one is reflected on the whole. And I don't know why this is. And that is Black Americans, Jewish Americans, and Muslim Americans. For whatever reason, when those three groups, if one of them does something, for some reason, it's reflected on the whole. But I've noticed also at the same time, there's kind of this very strong notion with all three of those communities of this very tight-knit idea of what it means to be that kind of person. I remember when I was mentoring under Jimmy Diggs, who was a screenwriter for Star Trek. He was a black guy, very successful, went into the Navy, and then through just ambition and I guess stick-with-itness, he ended up writing stories for one for Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and then a couple stories for Voyager. And I thought that's a success story right there. Although, even that said, he had kind of this notion that because he was successful, but other blacks weren't, his people were downtrodden, that somehow it reflected on him. And I remember we did this pitch meeting where we went out to Hollywood to pitch the series he wanted to do. And afterwards, he met up with all his Hollywood friends. I really thought nothing of it. When it happened, I realized, oh my God, I'm the one person who's not black in the room. And I realized, and this was strange, I didn't exist. I was in the background. And it was a whole bunch of successful or aspiring Black Americans in Hollywood working their way through the system. So, like I said, some successful, some still working on it. But yet there was still this they kept confirming to each other what it meant to be black and making comparisons to black and, well, compared to other people. Black compared to this. Well, because we're black, we're this. And it was a weird observation that how much of the conversation revolved around being black and what it meant to be black and this notion of being the underdog or being the victim. And at this point, Jimmy was far more successful than me. And it was weird because, granted, I'm shorter than all of them. So maybe I was just hard to see. But I wasn't there. I mean, Literally, I was just at the table and I didn't exist. And yeah, sure, they were all maybe a full head or more taller than me. Maybe they just didn't see me, but uh, that mentality kind of weirded me out. It's like, no, you're each your own person. You're not a group. And so when things like this happen, I got to wonder, what's it like for someone like you? Does it reflect on you? Do you feel like, oh shit, now everyone's going to think I'm like this? And if so, why is that? Why is it that certain groups, one person reflects on them all? Because it's not something that really makes sense to me or something that I can say I relate to. It hasn't been my life experience. I have no fond words to say about the Black Panthers. Anyone who praised them is deluded and naive. Wolf 10 Media. I agree, although I will say that Malcolm X was really on to something once he left. I have a lot of respect for him because he saw where things were wrong. He saw where things were flawed. He admitted it publicly and moved on. And while he hadn't worked it all out yet, and it was clear that the man was still trying to reform his worldview before he got murdered, it's a shame he got killed, because I think that if he had lived on, he probably would have formulated a more realistic, very helpful philosophy towards looking at the Black experience that was more healthy or more independent. And the history might have turned out different if he hadn't been gunned down. But again, that's a story for another time. Orlando has an amazing Vietnamese community. Funny stories about a girlfriend of mine selling some old jewelry at a pawn shop like Little Saigon. Not enough room for two type in and out, though. Not enough room for two type in, out. Type it out. Oh, not enough room to type it out, though. Okay, for a minute there, I thought that was a perverse comment. Yeah, when I went to school, I always got along with Vietnamese kids, especially the first high school I went to. The second high school, there were not as many Vietnamese kids. It was a different environment. But yeah, I don't know. Riverside was an interesting place because for the most part, race really was not an issue, except with the Black community. And again, it's just you didn't go there. You just stayed out. It wasn't your place. Thank you, Jim Baker, not Bill. Jim, I don't remember. Yeah, did you know that Jim Baker? You probably do. Tried to create an amusement park for evangelism. I think in Minnesota. Could you imagine if he had succeeded? I would have wanted to go just for the kitsch of it, just the fact that it exists. I love seeing Tom Morello from Rage Against the Machine in a Che shirt screaming to me, but man, when he owns guitars and cost more, yeah, exactly, cost more than his fucking house. That guy, yeah, him and Zach De La Rocha are so full of shit. SJWs are strange. They're constantly attacking their own side while constantly trying to expand into the groups of other minorities. A frustration, Faustian deal without any of the benefits. I think that's what you meant. Hmong are a dominant Vietnamese ethnicity in Minnesota. Okay, so Hmong is a type of Vietnamese ethnicity. See, that's interesting because I lived among Vietnamese kids most of my life growing up, and I didn't know that never came up. Well, I do feel bad about the Vietnamese kid who had his mom barfed on by a friend of mine, but that's again not for now. Let's see. I think a lot of it was we knew most of the Vietnamese kids well because we frequented all of their parents' businesses in the neighborhood. It was just you knew them. Rage Against the Machine 2021. Fuck you. Do what the government tells you. Exactly. I read the Black Panther wiki once, many years ago. From what I read, I got the impression they were basically almost all the killing was each other for power and control. Yeah, it did kind of turn it. Well, they were apparently they were the precursor to the Crips. That's where the Crips came from. Is that once the FBI took down the Black Panther leadership, they kind of disintegrated into gangs. Okay. Sorry, it scrolled down very quickly. I've got to scroll back up for your comments. Yeah, this again. Yeah, thrilling radio just to listen to this. Okay, Wolf 10 Media. Let's be real. A lot of horrible shit happened to my people. A lot of shit happened to people. Sorry about that. A lot of shit happened to people by a single person. Happened because let's be real. A lot of horrible shit that happened to people by a single person caused by people kept making excuses for them. I think I read that correct. Sorry. Yeah. A lot of the stuff that happens in this world and in our society is because a lot of people make excuses for bad behavior, or they just keep excusing it away. They don't want to address the real problem. Hindus I've seen people make fun of running 7-Elevens, but I've never seen anything worse than that. Where I grew up, it was actually mostly Pakistanis who ran 7-Elevens, and you didn't make fun of Pakistanis if you wanted to live. Yeah, don't fuck with Pakis; they'll kill you. I had a friend named Bari who was a Pakistani, and like by 16, the guy looked 25. He had this full, thick beard and broad shoulders, and it was kind of funny because in high school he just stopped showing up because he ran the family business, and the school kept saying, "You need a diploma." And he'd say, "No, I don't. I already know what I'm going to do for my future. I'm running the family video store. I'm already running the family video store." He just wouldn't go to school. And they couldn't argue with him because, well, he already had full-time employment and was supporting his family. Yeah, he was an interesting guy. He had a very, very twisted sense of humor. I'll tell you some stories about working with him in video class back in high school. He made this one video that I think everyone just later, different story. Pressing into the infantile selective applies to any group that can be used further to divide the wedge, and the wedge of divide and conquer has been said used in every empire on earth. Yes, 400,000 young American men shed their blood shed blood and their maker to stop Nazism. As Christ died to make men holy, let us die to make men free. Isn't it just a catchy lyric? Yeah. I don't know. I think that we have been given a very skewed picture of World War II. We've spent far too much time about Nazis. We don't talk enough about the Pacific Front and the realities of that and the reasons on both sides. We don't talk enough about the war at home. And we definitely don't talk about the sacrifice made by Americans who really had little stake in the war in Europe, and the sacrifices made for the Europeans and everyone who was under the boot heel of the Nazis. And that it sickens me that to this day, we're still writing the history of how the Nazis were the worst thing to ever happen in the world. But we never talk about who stopped them and why they were stopped, and how it was an effort of, multiple nations. That, during the Battle of Britain, Polish people came to Britain to fight on the behalf of the British to stop the Nazis, because they saw the Nazis as a problem to everyone, not just Poland. That we had people from all over the world joining in to stop what they saw as a crime against humanity. And that story is often shed for just going on about Nazis. And we're not even given a clear picture of the Nazis either. The Nazis we're told about now are very cartoonish. We don't understand, we're not told how it was that German people could be driven and conned to such an extreme, but what would put them in a place to follow such a madman? We don't talk about World War I. We don't talk about the other things happening in the world. We don't talk about the fact that eugenics was very popular globally. This wasn't just Hitler. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was big on eugenics. And in fact, most of the early leftists of that era were big proponents of eugenics. It was only later, when that wasn't popular, that they all stopped talking about it. There's just so many elements to the war. We don't talk about the realities inside Nazi Germany. There's always this weird association that the Klan and the Nazis are the same thing, and they're not. We don't get a true history of the Klan. The fact is the Klan first was originally a rich fraternity that was playing out violent and cruel. What started is essentially they were reenacting college pranks that they played at their elite universities, and it just escalated further and further to harassing Black families. And well, we don't need to go. You know where that went. And then later, when the Klan had a resurgence in the 1920s, it was no longer an elitist fraternal sort of thing. It actually was deeply tied to the labor movement, and that it was actually more of a labor struggle, and that it was a lot of working class Americans reenacting and trying to behave like these rich elites doing their fraternal gags. And that's when it got really violent. But yeah, it wasn't strictly a race thing. It was heavily rooted in the labor movement, which no one wants to talk about because the labor movement was left. Yeah. But most important, I think we need to spend more time talking about the global sacrifice and the better side of our natures that brought so many different kinds of people together to put down Hitler and the atrocities. And it also speaks well that not only that, the world then acted upon their better nature and chose not to punish the German population, chose not to punish the Japanese. Specifically, as I forget which politician said, at one time we hated the Japanese, now we must learn to love them. And we made them allies. And it was I believe General Marshall who primarily knew that if we turned them into allies and didn't punish them, that we had a better chance of not repeating a war and for them not becoming fascist again, because it was punishing the Germans that first drove them to fascism. And the fact that Germans kind of have a history of doing that. But it was better to make friends of them and to show them a better way rather than punish them. And it's strange now because we've gotten into this weird mindset where there seems to be a desire now to punish Germans after the fact. And by proxy, white people in general, which is disgusting because, again, I repeat, the vast majority of deaths to stop those Nazis and put an end to those camps and to put an end to all those genocides were white Christian boys from the Midwest who knew nothing about those. They had no stake in that battle. The only stake they had in was the war against Japan. And there was a real good reason they had a stake in that, because Hirohito really did want to enslave the US population. That guy was a madman. He had promised every Japanese family a white slave and homes in California. Maybe it would have been better off if they'd taken over California. Sorry. Let's see. A lot of Jewish women Marxist communists support the Black Panthers in the 60s were sexually assaulted at Black communist training camps, but naively, but sad, can't put it sad, but naivety is part of being left. Yes, it is. I think another reflection is the Bader Meinhof. Jesus was a good example of just how much they were deluded. They were siding with Islamists. A Japanese sumo wrestler can drink me under the table. Me, a Mexican, holy shit. This dude must have a super liver. When Ishii got carjacked, It was when Ishii's car got jacked. It was return. It would be returned. It would have Taco Bell's bags. It would have Taco Bell bags trashed in it. Yeah, that was true. Collectivism is baked into Black American culture at its foundational level. Kids are told told from the cradle that that what matters is never them but the group. That's not a good no. Maybe they need to be introduced to Ayn Rand a little bit and realize that you know what, there's only so much the group can take. You know that at the end of the day, the individual is the smallest minority, and you've got to choose your own destiny. You know, speaking of group versus individual, it wasn't easy for me to walk away from my family, but I was sacrificing too much for that group attachment, and it was destroying my life. And as much as it hurt as hell to not have that family and not to have a family anymore and to be isolated, I'm better off for it. I had a bunch of Korean run stores by where I grew up. I watched so many black kids steal right out in front of them, in front of the Korean store owner. It was a game to them. That's why the black Asian, yeah, exactly. I wasn't going to get into it, but I saw a fair amount of that too. The more collectivist your group, the more an individual becomes a reflection of the group. When everyone has to act and believe alike, the pattern recognition becomes insurmountable. And you know, that collectivist idea of group identity was one of the reasons the Nazis were able to take hold in Germany, is that the Germans themselves have always had this strong sense of what it means to be German, and that they've all got to agree on what a German is and what they say and do and how they behave. It's just integrated into their culture. It's even part of their language. So yeah, collectivism is only good to a point. There needs to be a balance. Yes, there are things bigger than us. There are things worth sacrificing for. The American dream, the vision of our founders of the Constitution, the higher ideals is worth sacrificing for. But, you know, when these things become real petty and ugly and it's dividing us, no. Okay. It's the influence of race hustlers like Jesse Jackson, Al Sharpton, the ACLU, and their socialist tendencies. Yeah. If you stand out, you get beaten down. If you want to be your own person, everyone you knew threatens to leave you. Yeah. And you know what? When I stepped out of my family's tight-knit attitudes and spoke my mind, yeah, I was a piece of shit. I think I'm just an anomaly in this system because every race I encounter would have a friendly experience with them. I don't know. I don't know if you're an anomaly. I think it just has to do with how you carry yourself, how you view yourself, and how you approach others for the most part. I mean, we're all going to have a certain hesitation to what's new to us or different or alien, but at least in the American culture, hostility is not our go-to. It never has been. And this myth that we're a racist country really sickens me. It was always easy to tell Vietnamese kids apart from Chinese or Japanese, mainly because you'd always hear the fortune son when they'd approach. No, actually, no. Vietnamese features are very distinct compared to Japanese or Chinese. Skin tone is a little more coffee-colored, coffee with a certain amount of cream, and also there's a broadness in the face often. But also because they have a little bit of French blood, their women have better curves usually. Vietnamese women can be very attractive. Yeah, they got that French blood in them that makes the hot temper go. It's also where they get those really great sandwiches from. You ever had Vietnamese sandwiches? They're awesome if you like spicy food. Okay. In Mobile, Alabama, we had children of Viet Cong. Really? That's interesting. Usually it wasn't Viet Cong who fled. Hell, not every black writer is going to be Dwayne McDuffie. Not every actor is going to be Denzel Washington. Not every black comedian is going to be Dave Chappelle. Well, I'm going to have to say nobody can be Dave Chappelle but Dave Chappelle. He is a one of a kind. I mean, we need more Dave Chappelle, if you ask me. I don't have to agree with him, but I like him. That's one of the things. I always like that Dave Chappelle is just going to be honest with you. And you don't always have to agree, but you're going to get the truth. And he doesn't hold back on anybody. I love that. Okay. The meme reads, and suddenly, for no reason at all, Hitler came into power for a reason. Most people are completely ignorant of just how bad Weimar Germany was. Yeah, it actually was a lot like California right now, if you think about it. California Uber Alice in Japanese. California Uber Alice. That's a song, actually. I skimmed Unbroken in middle school. It's the only reason I knew about eugenics. Ishi, please back up this stream. Okay, I will. Me, a slave to my Asian waifus? If you put it that way, that doesn't sound too awful, does it? You know what you need to see? If that really is what does it for you, there is a film. It's kind of in the line of Tokyo Shock. It's a film called R100. Letter R 100. I believe you can watch it for free on YouTube or on Amazon. It's worth watching. It's hilarious. A little weird. It's really funny. Perverse Japanese humor, but if you're into being dominated by Asian waifus, you'll like this film. It's up there with John Waters in bizarreness and humor. That and Weather Woman, if you've ever seen that film. That's another Japanese film that really could pass as a Japanese John Waters film. World War II fascism and communism were both reactions, bad ones, against globalism. International banker elites carving up nations, Germans drunk, bleached to kill their globalist tumor. Yeah. I joked, but I was almost half Vietnamese. My dad was a vet. A lot of our dads were vets. Mine wasn't, but I knew a lot of people whose dads were vets. R100 went in expecting a film about British interwar airships. Not as expected. Fun, though, wasn't it? I got that on DVD, actually. Isn't it ironic how acting offended by Gina Carano's post and subsequently firing her, proving Disney's point? Yeah. All right, guys. I've got to go eat dinner. I think this was very productive. And one of the things I really like about doing these with you is that, yeah, I came on, I spoke my piece, but then I got to hear from all of you. And in doing so, I've heard a lot of different opinions. I've gotten a lot of different viewpoints from people of all walks of life all over the country. And that is something no news source can ever give me. That's something that there is no way to replace that. And I wish we could all meet personally and talk face to face. That would only be the only way to make it better. So yeah, I really appreciate you guys joining me. I really appreciate your honesty. And may we do this again, hopefully under better reasons next time. You guys have a good night.